Good evening. This is BBC Newsline. Following the death of the Duke of Edinburgh, we look back at his long association with Northern Ireland, which began in 1949. Politicians, including the First and Deputy First Ministers, sent messages of sympathy to the Queen and royal family.
It is a sadness that I know will be shared by countless others in Northern Ireland and right across the world.
All those who come from the Unionist tradition, all those with a British identity, will feel this hurt.
We also hear from those who knew the Prince personally.
He was incredibly sharp and obviously highly intelligent, and he was a leader. He was a leader in his own life.
We speak to the former Irish President Mary McAleese, who met the Queen and Prince Philip on their historic state visit to the Republic.
It wasn't what I might call an everyday state visit. This was something really quite special, multi-layered, and it was about reconciliation and establishing a kind of a template for the future of good neighbourliness.
The Duke of Edinburgh visited Northern Ireland 56 times. And here at Hillsborough Castle, the flag is at half-mast and floral tributes have been left at the gates.
Also in the programme, 19 police officers are injured in a second night of violence in West Belfast as political efforts to bring the violence to an end continue.
And gardeners beware, we have some severe frost in the forecast over this weekend. I'll have your full weather forecast later in the programme.
Prince Philip visited Northern Ireland dozens of times as Duke of Edinburgh and as consort to the Queen. He was last here in 2017, and that was to hand out Duke of Edinburgh awards. The scheme that encourages young people to be confident and resilient is a huge part of his legacy. In the many tributes on the programme this evening, we hear from some of the countless number of people who were with the Prince during his private and public visits. First, our political correspondent, Gareth Gordon, looks back.
Wherever the royal couple go, and they face a crowded programme, there is a tumultuous reception for the smiling princess and the handsome sailor duke.
1949, in the days before mass television ownership and celebrity magazines, to be sure of seeing the royal couple on their first visit to Northern Ireland, you had to be there. And thousands were.
Royal tours are always marked by joyous cheering crowds, yet seldom if ever has there been a welcome to exceed Belfast.
4 years later, the Prince accompanied the Queen on her coronation tour. Again, thousands came to greet them as a special train brought them to many parts of Northern Ireland. They were here again in 1955, when the crowds were, if anything, even bigger. But the world, and certainly Northern Ireland, was changing. And in 1966, as the royal couple drove along Great Victoria Street in Belfast, a concrete block was thrown at the royal limousine, to the Duke's obvious concern. It was 11 years before the Duke and the Queen returned for her Silver Jubilee, by which time the Troubles were dominating life. A bomb exploded at the University of Ulster in Coleraine a week before they were due to visit. But 2 years later, the Duke's uncle, Lord Mountbatten, was murdered when the IRA detonated a bomb on his boat in County Sligo. The royals didn't visit again for a decade, but in 1994, the Duke represented the Queen at a memorial service for victims of the Chinook helicopter crash. Thousands of young people from Northern Ireland have also taken part in the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme.
What vintage year?
About 28 years ago in Buckingham Palace.
And you did it here in Northern Ireland?
I did, yes.
Which is yours, that?
The handsome one in the blue tie at the back there.
The royal couple were back in 1995 to open the new M3 road bridge in Belfast and restore city status to Armagh. The following year, the Duke agreed to become patron of the Royal Ulster Agricultural Society. In 2007, he attended the enthronement of the Church of Ireland Archbishop of Armagh.
Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you.
In 2011, the Duke accompanied the Queen on her historic visit to the Republic.
Prince Philip and I are delighted to be here and to experience at first hand Ireland's world-famous hospitality.
He was once again by her side during the Diamond Jubilee visit. Amidst the walkabouts and garden parties, this trip included the royal couple's groundbreaking encounter with Martin McGuinness. If the Duke felt uneasy, he didn't say so. Although at one point during their tour of Belfast Lyric Theatre, he seemed reluctant to delay and chat to the Deputy First Minister. The Duke saw Martin McGuinness and Peter Robinson again during a visit to the Crumlin Road jail. In 2017, he was back to hand out more awards in the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme. At the age of 95, his wit remained undimmed.
What was the total distance?
About 150 kilometres.
Kilometres?
Yeah.
That's cheating.
The Duke of Edinburgh visited Northern Ireland around 50 times, twice as often as the Queen. As many of the people who met him over that period will confirm, he remained, throughout it all, very much his own man. Gareth Gordon, BBC Newsline.
The First and Deputy First Ministers are among those who have led political tributes to Prince Philip. Arlene Foster said she was deeply saddened by the news. Michelle O'Neill said she wanted to acknowledge the sense of loss for all those who value and cherish the royal family. Here's our political reporter, Jane McCormack.
Prince Philip was no stranger to Stormont during his many visits to Northern Ireland. While he steered clear of the internal politics, he gained the respect of parties across the spectrum. It's unionists who will feel his loss most acutely, including the DUP leader who paid this tribute.
It is with deep sadness that I have learned of the death of His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh. It is a sadness that I know will be shared by countless others in Northern Ireland and right across the world. Prince Philip was widely respected for his active and dedicated service to the country and for his steadfast support to Her Majesty the Queen throughout her reign.
This afternoon, the flag at Belfast City Hall was lowered. Nearby, Sinn Féin's Deputy First Minister reached out to those mourning the late Duke of Edinburgh.
All those who come from the Unionist tradition, all those with a British identity, will feel this hurt and perhaps more acutely than others. So I wanted to send out a very strong message to all those people that I acknowledge your hurt and your pain and your suffering and offer my condolences to you all at this time.
The Secretary of State, Brandon Lewis, also paid his respects, saying, "Prince Philip lived an extraordinary life of service. The Queen's royal consort, a naval hero, and a man who inspired so many across Northern Ireland. He'll be remembered not only as a truly dedicated public servant, but also a devoted husband, father, grandfather and great-grandfather." In Dublin too, a tribute from the Taoiseach.
The British royal family's commitment to British-Irish relations has been a very significant one. It has been impactful and it has been constructive.
Other political leaders at Stormont recalled their own memories of meeting Prince Philip and his unique style of engagement.
Perhaps that straight talking attitude that people here have is something that chimed with his own, because he did like to express his views and his opinions, and I think he liked that. But I also think he had a particular interest in our young people and trying to get in young people in general and trying to get them engaged in constructive activity.
Although in high office, you know, in great grandeur where he lived his life, actually when you spoke to him, you did get a sense of the ordinary man who understood how to drop him down to your level and speak, you know, as the person on the street. And for that, we must all be grateful.
The SDLP, whose deputy leader, Nicola Mallon, welcomed the Queen and the Duke to Belfast in 2014, said they wanted to acknowledge the role he'd played in building relationships and promoting reconciliation across the island. MLAs at Stormont are expected to make formal tributes in the Assembly next week, a chance to reflect and remember a royal who held this place in high regard. Jane McCormack, BBC Newsline.
For some more reaction to the Prince's death, our correspondent Mark Simpson is at the Queen's official residence in Northern Ireland, Hillsborough Castle. Mark.
Donna, in total, Prince Philip visited Northern Ireland 56 times, and significantly, the majority of those visits came in the past 20 years or so, when he was in his 70s, his 80s and even his 90s. He made a lot of friends here during that time, and that's one of the reasons why the flag here at Hillsborough Castle tonight is at half-mast and there are floral tributes at the gates. Of course, he came to Hillsborough a lot, and most of those times he met winners of the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme, whether they be gold, silver or bronze. He is fondly remembered by many people here in Northern Ireland, as BBC Newsline's Sarah Gervin now reports.
The last time Prince Philip visited Northern Ireland was in 2017 to meet young people who completed the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme. It would be the last of his 56 trips here. He retired from public duties later that year.
And I think one of my memories from one of his last presentations was a young person who, I think the Duke at that stage he was either 95 or 96, and the young person described him as cool. And I thought, isn't that just lovely that a young person felt that he was cool because he was absolutely interested in what they had done.
Many young people who received awards have gone on to volunteer with the programme.
One thing that really stands out to me with the Duke was he was actually really funny. He had a great personality. He was very vocational, and his ability to grab a spark within the group was amazing.
When the Queen made her historic visit to the Republic of Ireland in 2011, Prince Philip was by her side. One of the highlights of the trip was the tour of Trinity Library.
He shook every single hand, and there must have been more than 100 people. It wasn't part of the protocol. He was just meant to say hello and have a conversation. But he did shake hands with every single person. I think that really, people thought that was a nice touch.
Olympic medalist Lady Mary Peters met Prince Philip many times during his visits to Northern Ireland.
I first met him when I was 18 at the Commonwealth Games in Cardiff in 1958, and we always had a bit of fun together. And then when I was Lord Lieutenant, he was always very kind and welcoming.
As well as official royal business, Prince Philip enjoyed leisure time here, particularly in County Fermanagh. As a Lord Lieutenant in Northern Ireland and a member of the Queen's household, Viscount Brookborough spent a lot of time with him through the years.
Well, he was incredibly sharp and obviously highly intelligent, and he was a leader. He was a leader in his own life. And one has to remember that possibly if he'd stayed in the Navy, he might have become a head of the Navy or whatever. So whenever you were with him, you always felt his presence. You always knew he was in the room. But he had that magical ability that he didn't stifle people or paralyze the room by being there, because he was so friendly to everybody. It marks an end of an era for all of us.
One of the many tributes tonight to Prince Philip, and here at Hillsborough Castle they remember him fondly. He first came here back in 1953 with the Queen by his side. Of course, it was shortly after the coronation. They were in Northern Ireland for a couple of days, and when they arrived here at Hillsborough Castle, they were greeted by two Lambeg drummers. When it came to Northern Ireland, the Duke always chose his words very carefully. Indeed, there were no gaffes, but he was interested in Northern Ireland politics, but that interest was expressed privately rather than publicly. In fact, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson of the DUP has been on Radio Ulster tonight talking about how every time he met the Duke would say things like, "How are things in Northern Ireland? Is it quieter? How are people getting on?" We know he was interested. We know he's now dead. We also know it's been a difficult week for politics in Northern Ireland. But I do think it's significant tonight, the heartfelt tributes which have come from across the political spectrum and indeed across this island to Prince Philip, who died this morning.
Well, as we heard earlier, one of the most significant visits by the Queen and Prince Philip to this side of the Irish Sea was in 2011. It was an historic state visit, the first by a British monarch to the Republic. It followed an invitation from the President of Ireland at that time, Mary McAleese. Earlier, she gave me her thoughts on the death of the Prince.
The first thought was just overwhelming sadness. That this man, that he didn't get to his 100th birthday, after such a lovely long life. But in particular, thinking of his wife, Her Majesty the Queen, for whom he has been just such a rock, such steady company, fun company, good company, very, very, very dutiful in every way without being po-faced or piocious, just always there for her. And I think with great sadness of her today, because the biggest loss of all, of course, is to her, that in the job that she does and in the role that she plays, to have had him, over these 8 decades has to have been a really, really important part of her life, emotionally, psychologically, in terms of the support that he gave her. And to have that absence now, I think, very hard on her.
That historic visit in 2011, you were there at the formal events, at the informal events. What was your time like, spending that precious time with the Queen and the Prince?
The 4 days were magical. An elderly lady summed it up at the end, an elderly lady who had been originally opposed to the visit, but then warmed to our royal visitors over the 4 days. She said at the end that she felt that the visit was choreographed by the angels. And I think part of that was that it was very evident from the very outset when Her Majesty the Queen set foot, came out of the plane at Casement Aerodrome, called after Sir Roger Casement, that here was somebody who had come on a mission of reconciliation. She wasn't just coming on a visit. It wasn't what I might call an everyday state visit. This was something really quite special, multi-layered, and it was about reconciliation and establishing a kind of a template for the future of good neighbourliness, trying as far as possible to put the past behind us and to go forward into the future with smiles on our face because we recognise each other as friends.
We've been told that the Prince had a very dry sense of humour. Did you encounter that?
Oh, I did a few times. Who could blame him? I mean, 80 years in the public gaze. If he was a little bit mischievous the odd time and brought humour to it, wasn't it a wonderful thing? And I think many people appreciated that in him, that he wasn't po-faced, that he could be funny and very witty. I remember in one of the lovely things that he did was he was very interested, as you know, in young people. And one of his great legacies, of course, is the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme and the International Award, of which the President's Award in Dublin, Gashka, is also a member. But there hadn't been a huge development of the relationship of the two awards on the North-South axis, and he was very anxious to develop it. So he organised for me to make the awards of the Duke of Edinburgh Award in Belfast, and I organised for him to come to Dublin and give the Gashka Awards. And as we were going into the Department of Foreign Affairs, into Ivy House, there were journalists in behind a roped-off area who were firing questions at him. And one of the journalists decided to follow him, and she came around the far side of the rope, and he looked at me and her, and he said, "Oh, look," he said, "one has escaped." Now, it was said in banter and a bit of a laugh, and it helped. All of that helped to create an atmosphere of just friendliness, friendly banter.
The former President of Ireland, Mary McAleese, remembering Prince Philip, who died today, aged 99. In other news, it's reported that loyalist protests planned for various places this evening have been cancelled as a mark of respect to the royal family. Last night, 19 police officers were injured in a second night of violence on both sides of the Lanark Way interface in Belfast. 74 officers have now been hurt in the violence across Northern Ireland, which began 11 nights ago. The police deployed water cannon for the first time in 6 years after coming under attack, as Kelly Bonner reports.
It was the second night of violence on both sides of the interface near Lanark Way in West Belfast. Although not to the same extent as the night before, police were pelted with bricks, bottles and fireworks. The violence began at around 7 o'clock when a large crowd gathered at the interface on the Springfield Road. Community activists worked to try and encourage young people to go home and not to engage in violence. At one stage, a group of community workers cleared away a burning bin and debris that youths had used to block the road.
All those people who stood here last night have to be commended for that work that they've done, because they don't want to see rioting on these streets. They don't want to see people being hurt or maimed. And without the actions of all those who stood here last night, and then I think the scenes would have been a lot worse than what they were.
The engagement worked for a while, but soon the crowd moved further up the road, where they were met by a wall of Land Rovers. Community workers on the Springfield side and police on the Lanark Way side had been successful in keeping the crowds away from the peace wall. But the focus then shifted to attacking the police rather than each other. Youths on the Springfield Road threw fireworks, bricks and bottles. Police then deployed the water cannon for the first time in 6 years in Northern Ireland. Just a street away off the Shankill Road at Lanark Way, a large crowd gathered to attack police. They set bins on fire and there was a steady stream of bricks, fireworks and bottles thrown at police. After midnight, the streets were largely peaceful, but concern is growing that there could be more disorder and disruption in the coming days. That's prompted calls for the violence to stop.
I do know of community workers who have been out on the unionist side as well, trying to prevent and talk sense into these young people. But unfortunately, at the minute, there seems to be no talking to young people on both sides.
With tensions in the interfaith communities high, many will be hoping those calls for calm are listened to. Kelly Bonner, BBC Newsline, Belfast.
As well as calls for protests to be postponed or cancelled following Prince Philip's death. As you heard there have been appeals for calm at the Belfast Peace Line at Lanark Way in the days ahead. Church leaders held an ecumenical prayer service close by this afternoon. Catherine Morrison reports.
A socially distanced and symbolic journey through the Peace Line. Clergy from all the main churches calling for calm on the same streets where violence has erupted these past 2 nights. Earlier, a short prayer service was held.
Because what's the alternative? Because of courage? Because of loved ones lost?
We haven't seen any of these kind of events for many, many years, and the last thing we want is that they become a day-to-day reality or a weekly reality, or that they continue.
We're here as bishops to support the local clergy who work day by day, week by week on the ground here with those communities.
Much of last night's trouble took place on the nationalist side of the interface on the Springfield Road. A few yards away is Joe McGivern's shop. He's been here for 28 years.
The reflection that's put out by the media and put out by politicians for their own dividends is that there's a threat of an Irish Sea border that's going to affect this. There's deprivation act, there's all sorts of stuff, right? These problems have been here forever, right? It's just another decade and another reason. The best way to stop this is community activists on the ground, right? Local people on the ground, stopping people, parents, right? Making sure where their kids are.
Over on the Shankill Road, more thoughts on what's behind the protests.
You know, because I think there has to be a protest, you know, for what's happening with the protocol and rules for other people. It's young ones, and they feel their Britishness is being taken away from them, and that's it.
Northern Ireland, really, isn't it? It's just something that seems to happen every couple of years.
Deja vu.
Yeah, it's just something we have to put up with, unfortunately.
Youth workers also believe the pandemic has played a part.
A lot of young people haven't had an outlet in a very long time because of COVID restrictions. They haven't been at school, and sometimes this type of negative activity can be very appealing.
All of these factors combine to create the conditions for rioting this week. It's now hoped the appeals for calm will be heeded. Catherine Morrison, BBC Newsline, West Belfast.
There have been fresh political discussions about the trouble as well. The Secretary of State Brandon Lewis and the Chief Constable Simon Byrne met the local parties earlier today. With more, here's our political correspondent Stephen Walker.
How do you find political answers to stop the violence and prevent it happening again? It's a question that's been posed here many times over the decades. Today our leaders said politics has to work.
Every political party in Northern Ireland needs to use its best endeavours right now to try and stop this violence, but also to deal with the major significant issues that we have. And there's no point in pretending we're not in a political crisis.
Others say any planned protests in the days ahead should be called off.
This is not a time for being on the streets. It's not a time for protest, because what we've seen is that protests can turn very nasty. I would be calling on everybody, wherever they're from, whatever community, to get off the streets, to stay off the streets. And if there are issues that you have, we can work them through.
Sinn Féin say unionists have a particular role here.
The reality is that the leadership of unionism and loyalism in particular needs to speak in a very clear and very unequivocal way and call for all of these protests to be halted. That hasn't happened yet, and I think that is not an acceptable situation.
Unionists insist that the violence has to end, and they stand by their call that the Chief Constable Simon Byrne must resign for the way he handled the Bobby Story controversy.
We are very clear. We support the PSNI, we support the officers on the ground. We want to see an end to this violence, but we also need to address the issues around policing and around the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Simon Byrne spoke to the parties today. He insists he has done everything correctly in recent weeks. The Alliance Party say it's time unionists shelved their call for him to stand down.
I think it would be further helpful to take the calls of resignation off the table, because it's very difficult to say you support policing and then differentiate out the PSNI leadership from that. The two go hand in hand.
There may be a different analysis from the parties on what has caused the trouble and who is to blame, but there is agreement on what has to happen next. The violence has to end and political solutions have to be found, and they have to be found quickly. Stephen Walker, BBC Newsline, Belfast.
Finally, Barra Best has the weather. Barra.
Thanks very much, Donna. Well, brace yourself for some chilly air. It's already begun to push southwards. It's going to continue pushing south over Ireland and the UK over the next few days. Very chilly conditions heading our way. Temperatures below average for the time of year, especially by night. In fact, gardeners beware. You may want to protect some of the delicate plants. Severe frosts inland, especially for the likes of Fermanagh, Tyrone and into Armagh and Down. Through this evening and tonight, a widespread frost will develop inland. Temperatures possibly -4 or 5 Celsius. A few passing showers could well be wintry too, even to some low-level areas, but not for everyone. Most places will stay dry, but it is going to be a chilly, frosty start to the day tomorrow. It's going to stay cold right through the day, but on the good side of things, it's also going to be mainly dry with some good sunshine. The frost should clear fairly quickly through the morning. The odd passing shower can't be ruled out on a light northerly wind. Where those showers hit, we could get a mix of rain, sleet and even hail as well. But otherwise, through the afternoon, many places dry. Some sunshine too. Cool around the coast with an onshore breeze. Temperatures here 5 or 6 degrees. Inland, possibly 7 or 8 Celsius, where we get the best of any sunshine in trapped areas away from the breeze. But the clear skies tomorrow stay with us tomorrow night too. So another very chilly one in the forecast. As the night goes on, we'll see frost once more beginning to form and temperatures widely inland again -2 or 3 Celsius. Around the coast probably staying at around 0. Into Sunday then, a chilly, frosty start to the day. A sunny start though. Later on as the day goes on, there will be more cloud. That cloud on Sunday night stops it from being too cold. And then gradually as we make our way through next week, the temperatures rise back to what they should be for the time of year, with a lot of dry weather in the forecast as well.
The latest local news is at 10:45 tonight. BBC One continues its coverage following the death of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. But from me, good night.